I think without question, I would agree that we haven't got it all sewn up. I mean, I think we're as far away from it as we've almost ever been. I mean, that's not strictly true. I think many things have come much better for us as human beings on this planet, and statistics can show that again and again and again. But I also, my own intuitive feeling is that there's something that we've taken a wrong track, and that we're missing a number of things that would make our lives much more harmonious. And the only reason I can say that so fervently is because of my immense privilege of having lived with indigenous peoples, and some of them do really show some egalitarian traits. And I know, I mean, one of the problems I'm having with being on this journey of mine is that I venture into romanticisms quite fast, and when I lived with tribal people and working with the BBC, I was so scared of entering into that sort of noble savage Rousseau, all, you know, the we're good at the base of it all, and that innate positivity. And so I didn't go there because I didn't want to be vilified by by the academic world, and it was something I was terrified of. But when I've actually sat back and I've really analysed and I've really spent time, and admittedly it's only a short period of time, and it's not, and I'm not an expert, I'm not speaking the language, and so I can't really tell. But the sensations that I have in the company of some of those communities is incredibly positive. And
I don't think you should discount them.
No, thank you. And I don't. I mean, in a way, that's what this journey's about. It's like, it's about many things, but there's one or two groups that we're going to go and live with later on, maybe this summer if I'm lucky enough to get invited and I can raise the money and these things. And I will not get an answer, but perhaps if I can take a camera and we can go with these thoughts in mind about seeing how societies can interact. And it's not about turning back the clock, and it's not about looking at them as if they are indicative of how we all were, because I think even that's dangerous. They're modern people in their own right. But as an indication of what our human potential is, and how perhaps we can overcome some of our stuff. I don't know. The other thing that's really been evident for me is when the Coggy asked me to give up sex and these other things, I had no idea just the level to which the conditioning that I'd received in my life had gone. You know, I thought sex is just a natural thing. Why would you give that up? I'm just a red-blooded guy like anyone else. But remove that from my life, and I realized how controlled I was by these forces within me, which only later, I mean, I'm talking a year later, I suddenly was beginning to have experiences from different parts of my body that were completely alien to me, that I had no idea was even possible. And suddenly it just made me realize that maybe I don't know what the natural state is. It's not for me to guess even. I mean, to judge that. All I know is that by removing something from my life, something else came in, and it gave me an understanding about myself that felt much more natural, felt much more real. And that's kind of part of my journey to look at, to spend time with indigenous people and spend time with people like you and all these great minds, is to try and make sense of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, abstinence is clearly part of many spiritual traditions, and there's presumably a good reason why that is the case. And I'm sure you're right that in many ways it's another aspect of you can't have everything, that there are downsides to everything. It's not good or bad, it just is going to be different. A life with interesting, loving sexual content is marvellous. A life without it shows you other things. And it's really, I'm reminded, I mean, God, I would be, wouldn't I? But I'm reminded of Heidegger, that truth is a partial unveiling that also contains another untruth. That what you're doing is seeing an aspect of something. The truth is never final. And the revealing of one aspect of truth is at the same time a concealing of another aspect. And so you can't have everything. And I guess that what is being asked of you is to do something very different from something you're already pretty well versed in. Yes. And other things will stand forward when you do that. Whether you really need to spend the rest of your life in darkness in a cave without
Which I don't plan to.
No,
But it's been a great little period.
So I can see the point of these things, and certainly it's true that when you don't do something, not only do you feel different and see things differently, but also that you really value very much those. I mean, I know it sounds a bit negative to put it that way, like banging your head against a brick wall, wonderful when you leave off, but it is also true that we don't value things when we have them all the time. One finds the spiritual through the material, not by trying to abstract yourself as far as possible from the material. You find timelessness within time, not by somehow trying to outdo time. You find the general through the particular, not by abandoning the examination of the particular. And these are insights that are hard to articulate to a modern audience, partly because of the way our language is. It sounds like it's contradictory, but what I'm saying. But it's certainly what a lot of great philosophers, what Goethe, for example, very much believed. And it's also what I think a lot of the distillation of spiritual traditions of wisdom have taught. So I don't think that one necessarily, I think the end of the journey, you might be, I think when people go off looking for special experiences and so on, that may be the end of the journey for them, and it may be very fulfilling. And I can't, it's really not for me to be laying down the law about, I'm too ignorant about what is valuable and what isn't. But I am interested in the idea, because it's one that keeps coming up, that at the end of the day, a lot of these people come back from their peregrinations to join ordinary workaday, everyday life and chopping wood and carrying water. But now it's transformed, not because it is any different, but because they are different because of where they have been. And so I think the idea of a pilgrimage is a brilliant idea, because the pilgrimage isn't something that ends your life. You don't go on the pilgrimage and then commit suicide or die. You go on a pilgrimage in order to return to the world. And you go on a retreat from life in order the better to join it again. And it's again a little bit like the story I tell about how things sometimes need to go away in the other direction towards what the left hemisphere can tell us in order to be incorporated into that picture.
This journey didn't start out being a spiritual one. It kind of has come about, these notions of things beyond myself and the bigger picture and stuff have just sort of have crept up, and I guess I should have seen it coming. it was destined to be. But so fasting, you've talked about, my sexual abstinence, meditation, we've talked about all these things. That there's some who might suggest that actually what's actually happening physiologically when we do these technologies is that we conserve some sort of energy, and maybe does that energy in some way help us with this filtering? What
I would say is obviously, and you must have this in mind partly, is that certainly would be, as I understand it, a Chinese idea that qi, you conserve qi in this way, and
prana in India,
and then yes, prana, and the notion that I think what all these things have in common, and the idea of the Tao and so on, which I, as soon as I discovered about that, I thought, God, where has this been all my life, Yeah. And it was one of those scales fall from your eyes moments. But the fact is that they all have this image of something that flows. Now, I mean, that sounds, okay, it's static or it flows, what, so what? Actually, everything, is in that idea of something that flows, which is, again, coming back to Heraclitus, who famously said everything flows. This perception is enormously important, and that does relate to the difference between the hemispheres, because the left hemisphere doesn't seem to understand continuity of flow. It understands a sequence of separate elements that are then stacked up, rather in the way that a digital sequence or a set of cine frames gives you the illusion of a continuity, but it's really a lot of separate things stuck together, however small. But the concept of something that actually is continuously and flows and changes is something that the right hemisphere seems to be better at understanding. That idea of flow, of something that flows, that is vital, that gives energy and meaning to life, and even to things that aren't apparently alive, like water. it seems quite an important one.
Sure.
I wouldn't by any means want to jettison anything we've learnt through Western medicine. I think in fact, Western medicine has many critics, but I'm not really one of them. I mean, I think that sometimes it can go terribly wrong when it thinks of the body as a machine, and when its practitioners think of themselves as technicians and don't pay attention to the whole person, and think it's more important to be sending for a test and tapping on the keyboard of their computer than actually relating humanly to a person in front of them. And there are many problems of that kind to do with decontextualizing and so on, but it's given us a fantastic understanding of so much about ourselves and has relieved a lot of misery. So let us be grateful for it. But I do think that, nothing is the whole story. And there are aspects of Chinese medicine that we desperately need to learn from. Not because we're going to abandon what we know in the West, but for God's sake, can't we have less of this ding-dong and more of a synthesis? And the trouble is that a lot of mainstream scientists, as soon as you say anything, however yielding to any other point of view at all, other than the absolutely narrow, technical, mechanistic vision, they get worried that you're a flake and you're about to pollute the pristine waters of science with all sorts of gobbledygook. But actually, it's about being a little bit able to accept we don't know everything. I mean, it seems terribly hard for some people.
Doesn't it just?